It's neat to have this talk today on Hamilton and Burr because it's Alexander Hamilton's birthday, January 11th. Problem is we don't know what year he was born. The issue was when we'll talk about, he was born down in the Caribbean and came up, his aunts paid for him to come up to go to school, and he got denied by Princeton, where I went. I'm not very proud of that, but ended up at Columbia. He lied on his application, as far as we can figure out, to make him seem older than he was. And if you're a historian, this is a lot like, I'm a classics teacher of Julius Caesar. We know when he was born, July, I think it was the 17th. We don't know the year because he lied about his age in order to be eligible to run for consul, the president of Rome. So that happens when you don't have exact records around. It's odd that you know his birthday, but not the year. So Burr and Hamilton were of that same critical generation when there were so many significant leaders around, especially for the small size of the country. I think I heard there weren't any more than 2 million people in the country at the time of the Revolution. Though they are of different social and economic backgrounds. Both fought in the Revolution. And also I'll be pointing out to you, both were here at Monmouth at the same time as lieutenant colonels in slightly different functions. We'll be talking about that. They both had their horses shot, as I mentioned earlier, within half a mile and half an hour of each other in the course of the battle. And that's what the main lesson for today is. As a teacher, I will be repeating myself, so in case you weren't paying attention or didn't understand first time through, hopefully you'll go away understanding that. After the war, both were lawyers and politicians in New York City, where they competed for the same clients and often saw each other on opposing sides of the table in court. As one of the historians said, and I'll cite it again later, had they not had different political philosophies, they might have been good friends. But their politics, and especially their ambitions, drove them apart, which ended with the famous duel on the heights of Weehawken in 1804, where Burr shot Hamilton. And we'll see why that happened. So what I'm talking again about is friendly rivals. How did this come to happen? So on the way, we'll look at their careers in the Revolution, especially here at Monmouth. And we might also be looking, was Hamilton really the good guy and Burr the bad guy? And I'll let you decide your own on that. We'll start with Hamilton because it's his birthday. We're not sure if this is his 271st or 273rd. Some sources say he was born in 1755, others 1757. We don't really know for sure. He was the son of a Scottish merchant on the island of St. Christopher, which I've never been to, down the Caribbean. There was a scandal because his mother didn't have a full divorce from her previous husband, so he was born out of wedlock, and we have a term for that. And that was brought up by his political enemies. And actually they had to talk in the Constitution about you had to be a native-born American after the time of the Constitution, because they had to leave a loophole there in case Hamilton wanted to run for president because he was not born in the United States. When you come to think about it, George Washington was born a British citizen. Okay? And Jesus Christ was born a Jew. So people have different backgrounds and change. I'll read to you from something I got off a website because it's a little complicated on his family background. One of the heroic figures of American independence was born in the British West Indies in 1755 or 57. He himself seems to have been confused about the year, but 1755 seems more likely. He was his parents' second bastard son. His father, James Hamilton, was Scottish and had already had a son by another mother. His mother, Rachel, was of French Huguenot descent and had been married earlier. So this was not unusual in the easygoing social conditions down in the Indies. What's interesting is that because his mother and his mother's family were French, he learned French. And this helped him a lot because when he was on Washington's staff at the middle part of the Revolution, he was a major link between George Washington and General Lafayette because he could talk French. And we'll maybe see a little bit more about that later. The other thing that's interesting is that at age 12, his mother died at age 11. And he essentially left him destitute because his father disappeared, never saw him again. He's raised by his aunts. He got a job at age 12 as a clerk in a store because he was bright. And as a clerk in the store, he learned how to value goods, how to reprice them from wholesale to retail, and how to exchange money. Because guineas and pounds and marks and all kinds of different foreign currencies were being used down in the Caribbean, and he was able to not only just compute the exchange rates in his head, but also to keep track of the exchange rates as he got the newspapers from London or Paris. And that's what helped him later on become the first Secretary of the Treasury, because he learned how to manipulate and plan numbers. So he did that at age 12. And his aunts, as I mentioned, saw his promise and sent him to school in Elizabethtown, New Jersey. Now, Elizabeth. He applied to Princeton, as I mentioned, but got rejected, so he ends up, he's a student at Columbia, starting in 1773. Molly, you ate all the bones, you're gonna have to go to sleep now. Daddy has no more bones. I'm sorry. I'm getting the stare. Okay, so when the revolution started in 1775, he wanted to be involved. And he is approximately, if he was born in 1755, 20 years old. I can do that math. He was commissioned a captain of New York artillery and raised a battery of about 70 men that ran a cannon, and he literally would sit there reading the book, because he read books well, and running this battery. So his action early in the war is as an artillery commander. And a battery in those days had 2 cannons to them. During the retreat from New York in 1776, somebody, quote, noticed a youth, a mere stripling, small, slender, almost delicate in frame, marching beside a piece of artillery with his cocked hat pulled down over his eyes, apparently lost in thought, with his hand resting on a cannon, every now and then patting it as if it were a favorite horse or a pet. This is Hamilton. He was small of stature, as was Burr. At the Battle of Trenton, his guns were a significant part of the battle in December 76. He had just left his sickbed, and his company was down to around 30 men. We're not really sure if he was at Trenton or not. And that's a lot of issues about Hamilton's early life we don't know about because of the conditions of his upbringing down in the Indies, and the fact that he did not survive to write his autobiography because he got killed in the duel in 1804. His son wrote a biography of him, and we have some information that's useful from that. Other revolutionary leaders, especially General Knox, General Washington, wrote lots of letters to their wives, their next of kin. We now go through those and get the reaction to what was going on in the battles. Hamilton didn't, so we're not really sure if he was at Trenton or not. According to the Army's counting of the troops, on the 1st of November, there were 28 cannons in the battery, and there were 18 cannons at Trenton. Therefore, it's a 63% chance his guns were even there. We don't know. The way I'm interpreting it is, I think he was sick. General Knox was sick also, and they were over on the Pennsylvania side. There was a temporary hospital for officers. I don't think he was at Trenton, but right now we can't prove it. I don't know if we ever will. And it's a shame because he's a major figure in the war in American history, and we don't know, was he at Trenton? Now, we had the same problem at Princeton. In the early stages of the Battle of Princeton on January 3rd, 1777, there was a meeting engagement. And by the way, Princeton only lasted about 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Same thing, Battle of Trenton, famous as it is, only lasted 30 to 40 minutes. The Battle of Monmouth here lasted from 7 in the morning till 7 at night. 12 hours. It is the longest single day's battle of the war. It is the biggest artillery battle of the war, with the exception of the 2 sieges at Boston in 1775 and Yorktown in 1781. Now, what's interesting at the Battle of Princeton is after the meeting engagement and we won the first part of the battle, there was a British regiment hanging out or going that sought refuge in Nassau Hall, the famous building that's still there. And somebody pulled up a cannon and they fired a shot and it hit Nassau Hall, broke through the wall, and took off the portrait of King George. That actually happened. The story has since developed that it was Hamilton's gun that fired it, and he shot at Princeton because he's mad he didn't get accepted there. That's a good story, but that seems to have come up after the 1840s. There's another tradition that a commander named Captain James Moore fired that shot. Again, we don't even know if Hamilton was even there. But that's how legends and history grows with figures of the Revolution. And the most famous example of all that is Molly Pitcher, whom I'll just put her side down. I got tired in my early days working or volunteering here of all the stories and legends and whatever about Molly Pitcher, especially those that called her Mary Ludwig Hayes. We know her, she married a fellow named Hayes later, but she also married a guy named Macaulay. And the history just got all garbled up, and I got so angry every time I saw it that 25 years ago now, I wrote a book called A Molly Pitcher Source Book. And what I did is I took my learning here, my processing from Princeton, where when you study ancient history, we only have about 20-25% of the sources. What you read on Wikipedia, the encyclopedias, is what people have fit together to make it fit together, but it's hard to make it all fit when you don't have all the sources to begin with. Okay, so what I did was to take all the sources on Molly Pitcher, put them in order chronologically, and you can actually see the story grow and grow and grow. Originally, it's based on, I believe, a real woman who was here. We don't know her last name because poor working women in those days didn't kept track of very well, but you can track how elements of George Washington met her after the battle. George Washington appointed her a captain. The French officers gathered money for her. She gave birth to a baby on the battlefield. There's all kinds of steps that the story grows that you can actually put together. But that's how it happens with legends. Did George Washington throw a silver dollar across the Rappahannock? No way. They had some famous baseball player went down there. He said it's physically impossible to do. Did George Washington chop down a cherry tree and tell his father he couldn't tell? No, it's a story made up to tell character. So legends are there even with relatively recent people. But anyway, I digress. He was an artillery officer early in the war, is about all that we can prove. Now, what happens in 1777, George Washington expanded his staff. And Hamilton tried out for the staff and was accepted because he was smart, he knew French, and he could write well. Because Washington didn't write most of his orders. He would dictate them to his staff members, and they would write it and sign his name even sometimes. We have the original manuscripts, you can say who did what. And also Washington, they kept a order book of copies of all the orders he gave. So not only did the staff members put Washington's orders into writing, they made a copy to keep in the copybook. So it's very important that he had good handwriting, he was smart, and he could work with George Washington. In that way, he became part of Washington's staff for 4 years. This was called, George Washington called his staff his family. There's an interesting story involving Lafayette here. When Lafayette came over, and I'll be giving a talk on him later in the year, really interesting, the King of France told him not to come here. So what did he do? He sneaked over to Bordeaux or somewhere, bought a boat, sailed over here, left his pregnant wife behind, and came over to America to have an adventure. And when he got here, he offered to serve for no pay. Now, we were tired of foreign officers, but if you're going to get one for no pay, why not? Lafayette's father had died. He had no father. Washington had no sons. So they did have a kind of father-son relationship going on. But Washington welcomed Lafayette into his family. To Washington, family meant his staff. To Lafayette, it meant father-son. And there was a language issue going on. But they worked that out and worked together well. And I said Hamilton was a key link in that. There was a book that came out in 2017 by Philip Thomas Tucker, Alexander Hamilton's Revolution, His Vital Role as General Washington's Chief of Staff. That makes me as angry as Molly Pitcher being Mary Ludwig. And I didn't circle back to that yet. But back in the 1880s, somebody identified our Molly Pitcher as a person named Mary Ludwig from Germantown or someplace outside of Philadelphia. Not the right person, because she was married to the wrong Hayes. John Hayes. The Hayes that she was with here at the battle is William Hayes. Wrong person, wrong identification, but you'll still see it on Wikipedia and where, and that drives me nuts. The other thing that drives me nuts is that Hamilton was Washington's chief of staff. Washington didn't have a chief of staff. They didn't have the concept of chief of staff till the 1900s. Washington's core staff were his old friends from Virginia. Robert Harrison was a lawyer from Alexandria. You know, Mount Vernon's down there just below Washington. And the other, John Fitzgerald was on his staff, was a business associate from Mount Vernon. Tench Tillman, I love the name, was from Maryland. He had a core of staff members that he had worked with back when he lived in Mount Vernon. None of them, he's the head of it all. There is no chief of staff. There were a couple young bucks there. Hamilton, who was 20, and his best friend, John Lawrence, who was there because John Lawrence's father, Henry Lawrence, was the president of the Continental Congress. And Washington had him there as a courtesy, but it was a good link to Congress. Kind of like if you've seen the movie Lincoln, when Robert Todd Lincoln enlisted, Mary had a fit. So President Lincoln saw that young Robert Todd became a staff member on General Grant's staff. And I don't think he's only under fire once or twice in the war. It's a relatively safe position. So there were 32 staff officers. My friend Arthur Lefkowitz wrote a book called Washington's Indispensable Men about his staff. And the core, as I said, with these older guys that Washington drew from Virginia. There were young bucks there, and a few young bucks there that will kind of rotate through. Now, with Hamilton, he's there 4 years, which is quite a while for one of the young bucks. But he was getting antsy because he thought the real way to win glory was to fight on the battlefield. So finally, in 1781, he and Washington had a spat. They were wherever they were. Hamilton was talking with somebody down in the first floor of the headquarters, and Washington came in, and Hamilton didn't say hello, and Washington went upstairs and said, "I need to see you now," and Hamilton didn't jump to see him. Hamilton got up there when he got done doing his conversation. Washington got really, pardon the French, pissed, and they didn't talk to each other for a week or so. And Hamilton finally let it be known he didn't want to work there anymore. Not that he didn't like George Washington, because he was doing a very useful role there, even though he's not the chief of staff, but he wanted a field command before the war was over. So he finally, in 1781, got released and was given command of an infantry battalion down at Yorktown. And if you go down to Yorktown, you can visit the spot that he attacked in the last big attack, and his unit carried an important British defensive position that helped win the Battle of Yorktown. So he won his glory. His friend John Lawrence wanted to have his battle command also. He got one down in South Carolina and got shot dead in one of the last engagements of the war, which is really sad. Okay. So, while I'm talking about Yorktown, we have here in Freehold, known as Monmouth Courthouse, a nice big battle monument. It is as big as the one at Yorktown. At Yorktown, their battle monument is in the town, which was, I guess, part of the battlefield, but the fighting wasn't there because they were around the town. Here, they put up the monument in the town because the park didn't exist yet. The park was made in 1978 in honor of the 200th anniversary of the battle, and we're darn lucky to have it because they were originally, some developers were going to build a mall here. And we came this close to having Monmouth Battlefield Mall in the park. And that scares the heck out of me. Also, fortunately, the state bought up some farms to make this lovely park, and the mall people moved a couple miles up the road where there was an old racetrack, which is why we have Freehold Raceway Mall. And it's fine with me. Okay, so at this battle, what did Hamilton do? He was a lieutenant colonel on Washington's staff. He would ride around carrying Washington's order. When they had meetings, he'd write down the minutes. And then he'd carry messages to the different officers on the battlefield and report back to General Washington. The day before, a couple days before the battle, Washington was approaching this area, the British were encamped in 3 campsites in Monmouth Courthouse. We're in the process of, the town is, I'm working with them to put some markers there before the anniversary in a couple years. The American Army came in through Hopewell and then Princeton and then Englishtown. Washington wanted to know where the British were, so he sent General Lafayette with some men to go figure out where the British were. Well, Lafayette, being young and eager, took his units, they were over Cranberry at the time, and didn't wait for supplies, didn't really even wait for maps, and took off and almost caught up to the British down down the other side of Heightstown I'm having a senior moment here, but I'll tell you in a moment. But he almost got himself captured, and Hamilton went along with him because he spoke French, and they were both in their early 20s, and that was not a smart move by Washington, because Lafayette almost got himself captured. Rising Sun Tavern is what I'm thinking of, and the British general said, if I had known that that Lafayette was that close, I would have captured him. But they barely got their bodies out of there in time because they're over-eager. And we'll see another example of over-eager in a moment. So the morning of the battle, again, this is June 28, 1778, Lafayette is sent to see what's going on when General Washington, who was not on the battlefield for the first half of the battle, sent an officer named Charles Lee, who some of you may be familiar with, some not. He's not a famous figure long range in the war, unless you study the early part of the war, specifically this battle, but it's Fort Lee, New Jersey is named after him. He's Washington's second in command and wanted his job, but we'll leave it at that, and you can come to my talk in June to get the rest of it. So Lee was sent to go beat up on the British, and Hamilton was sent to see what was going on, and he did so, and rode around quite a bit, and came back and reported to General Washington what was going on that morning. It wasn't going on well. Lee's advanced force got essentially beat up in Freehold itself and had to retreat. And when Hamilton met up with Washington, he was over here by the orchards in the middle of the battlefield here. And Washington had just come up and ran into Lee and said, what the hell is going on here? Although the Victorian accounts will say, he said to Lee, sir, what is all this confusion? And I think he said, what the hell's going on here? And some of the accounts say that Washington was swearing at General Lee, and our ancestors will say that Washington was a Victorian gentleman, he wouldn't swear. And some of you have heard these talks before. Dr. Martin says that Washington is a Virginia fox hunter and knows how to swear fluently in at least 3 different foreign languages. So Hamilton was in that area around noon, little afternoon, when Washington reached the battlefield and was yelling at Lee. And he, shortly after that confrontation, was helping to arrange some troops and ran up to General Lee and waving his sword and said, my dear general, let's stay here and we will die on this spot. Now this is Lieutenant Colonel, 20-year-old staff member, talking to the second in command of the Army. Lee, and this is from Lee's court-martial after the battle, which is our single most important source on the battle other than walking the battlefield itself, said, I was surprised at his expression. I observed him, this is Lee talking about Hamilton, much flustered in a sort of frenzy of valor. He's overexcited, he's got too much adrenaline going. I calmly requested him to observe me and see if I was not calm as you should be. I'm taking care to do what the commander has ordered me to. When I have taken proper measure to get the body of my men into good order, then I will decide if I will die with you on this spot or not. In essence, get lost, you young puppy. And how do we know that? Because he testified to that at his own court-martial. So after this fit of frenzy, Hamilton went to go post a cannon on the battlefield map. Now again, it's at point number, if you got the map that says Hedgerow Parsonage, where there's an H in between the 5 and the 6. and his horse got shot. Now, one thing you won't be usually unaware of if you don't study battles a lot, there are a lot of dead horses on battlefields afterwards. After Gettysburg, they piled them all up and burned them. There's a lot. Horses are bigger targets. Horses are 5 times the size of men. So battlefield will be littered, besides broken cannons and whatnot, and dead and wounded soldiers are going to be dead horses all over the place because they're good targets. Okay. Hamilton's horse got shot and fell over. And Hamilton said, "My horse received a wound which occasioned me to fall, by which I was considerably hurt." Yeah, I would be too if I fell off a horse or the horse fell on me. "This and previous fatigue obliged me to retire and prevented me from knowing what happened next." Now, we had I don't know, 5 years or so, a Hamilton Society came here. And I took them around to different places Hamilton was in, and they were much distressed that Hamilton left the battlefield around 1 o'clock after his horse got shot. I can understand that. I think he was worn out. He had just come back from Rising Sun Tavern the night before. He was running around all morning delivering orders, and his horse just got shot. And he had reason to leave. Now, the second part of it, his son, John Hamilton, wrote in the biography I mentioned, 1841, that Alexander had his horse shot under him, hurt by the fall, overcome by heat. He had ridden through the action without his hat. He was compelled to retire. That's the kicker. And when you study the battle enough, you get these little pieces together, then you can weave them together. Yes, he was tired, but in the morning running around, he lost his hat. As I would say in Latin class, bigus dealis. Well, try walking around out there for a while in this heat of the summer with no hat. He's got sunstroke. I'm sure he's not had enough liquid to drink. So not only did his horse get shot, and he got thrown from the horse, he's got heat prostration. He has good reason to leave. Okay, and this will happen to him and other officers. His friend John Lawrence got wounded. And what will happen by the end of the battle is he's running out of staff officers because they're all exhausted. And this is a problem we had in the Revolutionary War in general, that we didn't make good use of horse troops, cavalry. They should be using cavalry and cavalry officers to scout the enemy and carry messages, but they're not. And he's using his staff officers. So that by the end of the day, his staff officers are exhausted. How can they carry his orders when they're out getting their horses shot or getting themselves shot? And as I mentioned earlier, Princeton lasted 20, 30 minutes. Okay. Trenton wasn't much different. This battle is going on all day. So we're lucky he had any staff officers left by the end of the day because he was misusing them, and this is not a problem they resolved by the end of the war. So anyway, I digress. So after the battle, Hamilton wrote very warmly of how brave General Washington was, and Washington wrote even more warmly on how neat Hamilton was, so they liked each other a lot and reciprocated. At the court-martial, which General Lee wanted, he testified twice. General Lee was his own lawyer. Now, you may have heard the aphorism from President Lincoln, "He who has himself for a lawyer has a fool for a client." Lee was putting up a pretty good argument that he didn't really do anything bad and actually ought to get a medal for what he did at the battle. And the place where he caught Hamilton was, he said, "Did General Washington give me specific orders on what to do that morning?" And Hamilton says, "Yeah, I think you were supposed to do this and that. Can you produce the order?" I lost it. He was the one who wrote the order out and was supposed to keep the copy of it, and he couldn't produce it at the trial because he didn't like Lee. So I think there were some fudging going on there, and I haven't heard Hamilton directly accused of that before, but that's what happened. Now, Lee ends up getting convicted, and maybe he did good things at the battle and maybe not, but one of the charges was disrespect of General Washington, and the Army wasn't going for that. So what they did with General Lee is they fired him from the Army for a year. Now, if he was really guilty, they would have fired him forever or put him in jail or something. They fired him from the Army for a year. And Lee didn't like that. So he went to Congress and lobbied to get reinstated. And Congress kept putting it off, and they got bothered by Lee so much that in December, a few months after the battle, they voted 7 states to 6 to fire him forever. So that's the end of General Lee. Because of this, Lee's friends and Lee's not friends argued with each other, and they had this nasty custom called dueling, which fortunately got phased out after the 1830s or so, but was what gentlemen did at the time of the Revolution. John Lawrence, Hamilton's friend, his father was the president of Congress, criticized Lee so much that he challenged Lee to a duel. Now, usually at these duels, if you're affronted, you will state your case. You show up with a second, and you line up, and you do your 10 paces, and you turn, and you fire in the air, and everybody's honor is taken care of. Although there will be a doctor there in case one is needed. Dueling is what they did in that battle. Supposedly, Lee, this was December 23rd, 1778, slightly wounded Lee in the side. Lawrence did. The most famous early duel was with Andrew Jackson, president. He married a woman named Rachel, whom he loved very much, and her divorce was not, according to some accounts, totally finished yet, so she shouldn't have been marrying him yet. But they did, and somebody accused her of being a bad woman, and Jackson had a duel and got shot in the chest and carried the bullet the rest of his life. Another duel, well, there's a couple more ones involving Lee and Hamilton's friends, but I don't have time to get into them. But the most famous duel in the family was Hamilton's son was in a duel and got himself shot dead. And this will be important as we get into the political conflict with Burr later. Burr knew all about duels. And I'll just jump ship right now for a moment. He actually, as being the one challenged, got to pick the weapons. He picked the pistols that had killed his son when he went to the duel with Burr, which was kind of odd. So anyway, after the war, Hamilton marries Elizabeth Schuyler, a powerful family in New York. They had 8 children. He was a lawyer. He's a strong Federalist. He wrote more than half of the Federalist Papers, which helped persuade New York and other states to approve the Constitution, to get it passed. He's the first Secretary of the Treasury. He paid off all the debts to get the currency into good form, had a handing in how Washington, D.C. became our capital. Very important figure in the early Federalist period. The problem is the Federalist Party is dying. It was Washington's party. Nobody really liked John Adams, and then you have this fellow Jefferson come along with the Democrat Republicans. So he resigned from the government in 1795, basically because he couldn't live on his salary of $3,500 a year. He could make $12,000 a year being a lawyer. So he's out of the political spectrum, but still a power behind the scenes. And this is where he starts conflicting with Burr. We'll go back and pick up Burr's background in a moment. Burr really didn't have a political party, but he didn't like the Federalists because, again, they were fading. So he becomes a freelance and eventually joins Jefferson's party, the Democrat Republicans. Hamilton and Burr then began fighting. They would have been friends, as one of his biographers says, they would have been friends had they not had different politics. But they have different politics and different ambitions. Hamilton doesn't want to be president. He's happy being a rich lawyer in New York, but he blocks Burr from becoming governor of New York. And he, in the election of 1800, it was interesting in those days that when they did the electoral votes, the guy they just voted for president, and the guy with the most votes was president, and the guy with the second most was vice president. They didn't do it separate. So when they had the election, all the by the way, Burr had been nominated to be Jefferson's vice president because they needed New York's votes. So Jefferson and Burr are on the same ticket, and all the Democrat-Republican electors voted for Jefferson and Burr. So when they counted the votes, Jefferson and Burr had the same number of votes. And Burr says, wait a minute, I could become president now. And when they take that to vote in Congress, they vote by state. So there's all kinds of lobbying going on where Burr is trying to overthrow his own presidential candidate. Hamilton enters the fray and throws his support behind Jefferson and blocks Burr from becoming president. That is the beginning of the seed that leads to the end. But later on, Burr heard that Hamilton was at a dinner party up in Albany or something and said to somebody with no reporters present that Burr was a dangerous man and one who ought not to be trusted with the reins of government. And that got back to Burr in New York. He said, you have offended me. And told Hamilton, take it back. And Hamilton says, what do you want me to take back? And Burr says, take back what you said about me. And Hamilton says, what did I say about you? When? Where? And Burr says, take it back. And they're not communicating until finally Burr challenges him to a duel because his honor had been affronted. And they'll end up at the duel on July 11th, 1804. And I'll talk about that at the end of the talk. Okay, when did Hamilton meet Burr? They're in the same age group. They ran in the same circles before the war, but didn't meet. They were both at Bunker Hill, but didn't know the other was there. The interesting thing is Burr tried out for Washington's staff in 1776, a year before Hamilton did. He didn't like it there and left and became chief of staff for some other general. So they just missed being on the staff together. So they knew of each other by then, but no direct contact. They were both here at Monmouth. Again, Hamilton was lieutenant colonel on the staff. Burr is going to be a field commander. We'll talk about that in a moment. They did have direct contact in New York, after the war, in the legal system. But they didn't become enemies until Federalists and Democrat Republicans got set up. Remember, Washington said beware of political parties, because there's no provision for those in the Constitution, and that's why we've had changes regularly over the years. So they ran in the same circle. They were professional acquaintances. I wouldn't say they were friends. And it's Chernow who wrote the major biography of Burr upon which the musical was based, is the one who said, had it not been for their political rivalry, we might have been good friends. But they weren't. Now let's go back and look at Burr briefly, and then we'll go and finish with the duel. Again, Burr was also a lieutenant colonel at Monmouth. I apologize for repeating, but you'll go away having understood that. He was born to a distinguished family in 1756, almost the same year, or one of the years that Hamilton might have been born. His father, Aaron Burr Sr., was the second president of Princeton University. His grandfather, if you studied American history, was Jonathan Edwards, one of the famous preachers of the Great Awakening in early America. And so he came from a firm, strong family. Hamilton, his parents weren't legally married. His mother died when he was 11. So they're from different social sets. Burr went to Princeton. Hamilton got rejected by Princeton. He graduated at the age of 16 in 1772. He tried divinity school and becomes a lawyer. Beginning of the Revolution, he is an officer of an infantry regiment. Okay, we'll get that in a moment. But the similarities so far, they're both bright. And probably spoiled. Hamilton was 5'7", Burr was 5'6", and they both served well at the beginning of the war. Although Burr does not want to be on Washington's staff, and Hamilton was. Now, at Monmouth, where Hamilton's riding around giving orders out for General Washington until his horse got shot, Lieutenant Colonel Burr is commanding an infantry regiment, Malcolm's additional regiment. They called it, a guy named Malcolm paid to raise this regiment in Pennsylvania. He was old, he couldn't campaign, so Burr, as the lieutenant colonel, had the active command of it. And he had an active part in the battle. Again, if you look at the map, the one that says Hedgerow and Parsonage, over towards where the B is. At the middle part of the battle, when the British had carried the American lines, Colonel Burr was with his unit over in some woods on the western section of the battle. The British Grenadiers made a charge across a bridge back there, and Burr countercharged. And while he was countercharging, he got an order from General Washington. Now, General Washington, I don't know if you can see out there or not. Oh yeah, you can see because the trees are down. There'll be more trees down when we chop the rest of them down. The leaves are off of them. On the far hill where you can see the green, the machinery that's working on the top of the hill, putting in a pipeline. Washington was up there on Perrine Hill and saw Burr advance his unit and said, I didn't order any advance, and sent an officer down to tell Burr to retreat, to withdraw. So Burr's out there in the middle of this field being shot at by the British. Now, if he stays there, he's going to get shot at more. If he advances, he might defeat them, but he's got to follow General Washington's order. So Burr gets the order. He turns to give the command to his adjutant to tell the unit to retreat. Where he had lifted his leg up, when he turned, the horse got shot and killed. Falls on him. Okay, so his fault. So he lost his horse as Hamilton did, and it had a worse fall. And he also has to leave the field because he's really hurt by this. And what he did leave the battle area. He stays on the field for another day, but his writings and his actions for the next month don't make a lot of sense. I think he got concussed. He got a concussion, which is more than what Hamilton had sunstroke. But I think Burr got a concussion. And that'll be the end of the service of the war. So what brought us together today, in that it's January 11th, Hamilton's birthday, is to talk about both our lieutenant colonels, Hamilton on the staff, Burr as a field officer. Both had their horses shot, and Burr got the worst of it. Now, I've done some research into exactly what part of the battle that happened in, but that's beyond what we're working on right now. But just say that happened, and I'm pretty convinced it happened around 1:30 or so, within half an hour or so of when Hamilton went down. Now, after the war, Burr marries to a widow of a British officer who was 10 years younger. That was sad. His daughter died in a shipwreck off South Carolina, which was sad. But he was a lawyer, rivalry of Hamilton up in New York. And we talked about the election of when he could have almost got himself elected president. That was in 1800. 1804, Hamilton blocked Burr from becoming governor of New York. And they're really annoyed, Burr is, with Hamilton after that quote, where Hamilton said, or he said to have said, that Burr was a dangerous man who ought not to be trusted with the reins of government. So this led to the duel, and Burr is the offended party, accuses Hamilton. Hamilton gets to pick when, where, and the weapons. Now, they're going to pick to do this in Weehawken, New Jersey. Why? Because New York City has very strict laws against dueling. Apparently New Jersey wasn't so bad. So they hopped in boats and went across the river to Weehawken, up on the heights there. Now, I've never been there. There's supposed to be a little marker there on the edge of the parkway. I haven't been there yet. It's on my bucket list. Maybe some of you have seen it. I see heads nodding. But they show up with their seconds and with a doctor. Now, what's interesting here is that, as I mentioned, that Hamilton picked as weapons the same pistols his son Philip had used in a duel on November 23rd, 1801, at the same place. Okay, at Weehawken. And he was killed 3 years earlier. There's different etiquettes at the duel. Usually, again, if they're going to be friendly about it, you just shoot up in the air, shake hands, and go home. Some strange things happened. When they're lining up to do the duel, they do have seconds present. in case, I don't know, somebody runs away or something. They have a doctor present, but everybody there turns their backs. The only ones seeing each other are the two guys shooting each other. So if it goes to court, the doctor and everybody can say, I didn't see what happened. I was looking the other way. Okay? So Hamilton picked the weapons. He picked it so that he took the sides like when you're picking the ends in a football game. He was looking into the sun. That was stupid. He should have had Burr looking into the sun. And the question is, did Hamilton plan to just do the gentlemanly thing and shoot in the air? But he did write his will before he went over. His wife knew what he was doing and begged him. He's got 8 kids. Why is he doing this? Because if he doesn't show up, he's a coward. And he can't be a gentleman and be a coward. So you would think he would line up there with Burr, shoot up in the air, shake hands, go home. But apparently, when they did their 10 paces and he turned, his gun went off. Now, whether it was a trigger finger, or an accident, and the bullet whizzed by Burr's ear. Burr's pissed. He's not going to shoot up in the air. He goes bang and hits Hamilton in the chest. And he died the next day. He died 31 hours later after much pain. And we still don't, to this day, know if they were going to do the honorable thing or really intended to kill each other. Now, the sad thing about this is Burr at the time was Vice President of the United States. Both New York and New Jersey indicted him for murder, but neither charge went to trial. The Burr ran off and stayed with a friend of his down in Georgia until the heat wore off, and then came back to finish his term as vice president. And he got away with it. And he lived until, I don't know the death date here, but anyway, he's buried over in Princeton. Every once in a while I go visit him over there, because that's where his family had been. He died in 1836 and is buried in Princeton next to Aaron Burr Sr. and Jonathan Edwards over in that little cemetery next to Witherspoon Street. Okay, so that's the story of the friendly rivals of Burr and Hamilton. I assume a lot of you have read or seen the musical. I haven't, maybe deliberately. A, I'm not a big fan of rap. And B, I got kind of turned off to it when I saw Les Miserables on TV, which is also a long, long, epic musical, whatever. And I saw the middle part and then the last part and the first part, and I still don't see the continuity of the plot. But maybe one of these days I'll give in and watch the musical. There are some distortions of the battle, which is necessary when you do music and history. To me, the better way to learn about Hamilton is to read Cherneau's book. Now, Cherneau's biography is fat. I have never read it. I have listened to it. I have it books on tape. And as I drive places or to talks, I listen to each tape twice to make sure I get all the facts in. So if you want to learn more about Hamilton, you will learn more from Cherneau's book than by watching the musical. What's interesting is, though, that the musical fostered a lot of interest in the Rev War and in this battle in particular. And we had an uptake in visitation and whatever. And just share with you, we are videoing this to put it on YouTube. This is by far the most popular of my lectures that people and kids doing research and whatever around the country look at, is the one in Hamilton and Burr. So, in summary, the final summary, Hamilton may have been an atypical revolutionary. He's more loyal to the country than to his state. Okay, he was, without Hamilton, I don't know that they would have even passed the Constitution, because the Federalist Papers persuaded New York State to be the 9th state, which is the one that tipped the balance. As opposed to Burr, who seems to be just very self-interested. He's in it for what he can get, as far as I can see. You're welcome to argue otherwise. How can he get political power? By changing parties at the opportunity, by dueling his associates. Also, Hamilton is a prototypical American immigrant from rags to riches. He's essentially a bastard from the Indies, had to work for himself at age 12, was educated at a young age, fought in the Revolution, was a revolutionary hero, worked with George Washington, helped set up the country. He was rags to riches, although he didn't get rich. Where did he get his riches? From the marriage to Elizabeth Schuyler. He married into a good political family in New York. Was he self-interested? I don't know. That's hard to call with Hamilton. He's certainly smart. He certainly contributed. I guess if he were less abrasive, but maybe was he more honest than Burr, that he's calling Burr what Burr may have really been, which was a opportunist. But that got him in trouble. But he didn't have the sense to back off because of the extended, I guess, concept of honor in those days. And I don't know, I don't live in those days. We don't have duels anymore, fortunately. So was one of these guys gooder or badder than the other? Okay, they're both patriots, even though Burr did some nasty things afterwards. And Burr fought as long as he could in the war till he got disabled by his getting disabled here at the Battle of Monmouth. So I guess there's a reason why Hamilton's face is on the $20 bill and not Burr's. Although I have been distressed that a couple years ago they wanted to put Harriet Tubman's face on the $20 bill. And I think currently they want to put Donald J. Trump's face on the $20 bill. But that can't be done until he's passed away, which I'll agree to when he's passed away. And I'll just leave it at that. So that's the end of my talk. I'm glad that Molly's woke up. Yes, you can tell when Daddy's almost done. Yeah. And I'll be glad to answer questions or comments. If not, okay, yes.
So Burr was indicted for murder in New York. Was there a trial at all?
No. I have some notes on here I didn't read. The indictment came from Bergen County, which must be where Weehawken is. New Jersey Supreme Court quashed the indictment on a motion later, and he fled to Georgia, and the New York one was just dropped. Yeah.
New York
because it didn't take, I don't know if they had jurisdiction, it didn't occur in New York.
Okay.
Yes?
You said that Hamilton's son was shot at the same place with the same
3 years
guns?
earlier with the same guns.
I never heard that before.
Yeah.
What was the...
I don't know the full background on that. You'd have to look it up on Wikipedia. But his son's name was Philip. In 1801, he had a duel with somebody and went and shot. And actually, Hamilton, the dad, and Philip, the son, had a discussion on should you deliberately miss on the first shot. And it's not like in football where one guy shoots, the other guy shoots. They can both shoot at the same time if they want. But if they're standing there looking at each other, which I think was happening with Burr and Hamilton, and did Hamilton deliberately fire to miss? But if you're going to fire to miss, you want to shoot straight up. Or was it a hair trigger? Or did he really want to shoot and just miss because he was looking into the sun? We'll never know.
Yeah, 2 questions. Number 1, you mentioned that John Lawrence was at this battle. Do we know what he did?
Yes.
Or what happened to him?
He was not as important, even though Hamilton is not Washington's chief of staff. John Lawrence is there because he's young and energetic. And actually, the 3 of them loved to play cards and drink and whatever, Lafayette, Lawrence, and Hamilton. He was running around all day delivering messages, as was Hamilton. I'm not up at the moment, I can look it up in Gary Stone's book, when and where he was wounded. But he is wounded later in the day. So he's delivering messages. And I haven't fully tracked him yet because Hamilton's more important. But I use that as an example of how staff officers were overused. General von Steuben was out doing a scout early in the morning, almost got himself captured. And he's one of the biggest generals in the Army. Okay, your second question?
So you mentioned that the election of 1800, Aaron Burr and Jefferson had a tie, so it was down to the delegates, and they voted for Jefferson, and that Alexander Hamilton played a part in convincing him.
Yeah, because he did not have to enter that controversy at all. He could have just stayed home. Mm-hmm. But he felt, even though he didn't like Jefferson's principles as founder of the Democratic Republican Party, at least Jefferson had principles. And his opinion was all along that Burr did not have principles. So he threw his support and support he had in New York into Jefferson.
Was that like decisive and like you think it
Yes.
was? Okay.
Yes. And that's why they changed the law. That, again, you understand how all the Democrat Republican electors voted for Hamilton and Burr, because they didn't separate president and vice president. They had the same number. So when they put it into the House, it's by state. And Burr was trying to figure out how to get himself elected president, which is, I don't know how things were going. We wouldn't have bought Louisiana. It's a very strange thing what happened if Burr had become president. But he might not have shot Hamilton long range, but I don't think that would have had a bigger effect. So anyway, it's an to look up that election is quite interesting. Question in the back.
Was John Lawrence from the slave-holding South Carolina family? He was. Wow.
Washington had slaves.
I know, but I know Lawrence, I think they were the biggest slaveholders in the country.
I
Well, one
can't
of
attest to that, but he was from a wealthy family, and they say he ended up dying defending South Carolina in one of the last engagements of the war, which was very sad. Yes.
You had said something, and I didn't catch it right. Was Burr trying to become governor of New York?
Yeah,
Hamilton?
kind of like Richard Nixon. Remember when he lost in '68 and he tried to run for governor of California and couldn't make that. And it makes you wonder if the last Republican will become candidate for president, will become governor of California or not. But yes, he tried to become governor of New York, and Hamilton blocked him. Because Hamilton and the Schuyler's, because Hamilton was married into the Schuyler's, who were rich and Federalists. Okay, all good questions. I thank you for going more. Yes.
Hamilton did not die right away.
31 hours later.
th-
So they put him in the boat. The doctor looked at him. He got wounded in the chest, and took him across the river back to his home, and he died 31 hours later.
Did he have surgery? Do you know what
It was a
happened?
death. It was a fatal wound. There's no way to deal with it. Sometimes it's hard to tell with those things, like with President Lincoln. Did the gunshot kill him, or did infection from the doctors probe, all the different doctors probing in there? I think Lincoln's, as with Kennedy's wounds, which are fatal. Okay, again, thank you all for coming out.
Thank you.